Welcome back to the unofficial Magic the Gathering audiobooks. Your humble narrator, Phil Dawson here, and letting you know we received our latest patron. Michael has joined the squad as a content goblin. And I just wanted to say thank you so much. It really makes my day to see everyone not only listening and sending me notes of how much you like and appreciate it, but getting some financial incentive is just, it's mind-blowing. It really is. So thank you so much. Again, if any of you are interested in joining up, we have multiple levels of support you can check out at patreon.com. Just search my name, Phil Dawson, and the page will come up. Pick your level, and let's rock and roll. Again, I always appreciate hearing from all of you, so wherever you're at, drop me a line. Let me know how it's going and what you think of the story so far. You can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram at PhilInSendai, and I'll continue to do my best putting out the content. You ready for Chapter 14? Let's get going. Chapter 14. It had happened before in the Between Worlds, a sensation of falling that lasted until Xantcha opened her eyes and found herself looking at nothing familiar. Ah, awake at last. The voice was not quite a man's voice, yet deeper than most female voices and quite melodious, though Xantcha suspected that an acid personality powered it. She could almost picture a Phyrexian with that voice, though this place wasn't Phyrexia. Not a whiff of glistening oil accompanied the voice, and the air was quiet. There was music in the distance, music such as might be made by glass chimes or bells. Xantcha remembered the wind crystal on another world. She realized she was not in a bedroom, not in a building of any sort. The wall to her left and the ceiling above were a shallow, wind-eroded cave. Elsewhere, the world was grass. Grass with a woman's voice? Where am I? How did I get here? Urza, where's Urza? We were together on the ice fighting Phyrexians. She propped herself up onto one elbow. I have to find him. She was dizzy. Xantcha was rarely dizzy. As you were. By its tone, the voice was accustomed to obedience. Xantcha lay flat and returned to her first question. Where am I? You are here. You are being cared for. There's nothing more you need to know. She'd been so many places, picked up so many languages, Xantcha had to lie very still, listening to her thoughts and memories before she could be sure she did not know the language she was speaking. It was simply there in her mind, implanted rather than acquired by listening. Another reason to think of Phyrexia. Xantcha considered it unlucky to think of Phyrexia once before breakfast, and here she'd thought of it 3 times. She realized she's very hungry. If I'm being cared for, I'd like something to eat, if you please. Urza said manners were important among strangers, especially when one was at a stranger's mercy. Of course, he rarely bothered with such niceties. With his power, Urza was never at a stranger's mercy. Xantcha remembered the turtles, the Phyrexians they'd been fighting before. Before what? She couldn't remember how the skirmish had ended, only a bright light and a sense that she'd been falling for a long time before she woke up here, wherever she was. The air will sustain you, the voice said. You do not need to fill yourself with death. Another thought of Phyrexia, where complete Phyrexians neither ate nor breathed, but were sustained by glistening oil. I need food. I'll hunt it myself. You'll do no such thing. Xantcha pushed herself into a sitting position and got her first look at the voice. A tall woman, thin through the body, even thinner through the face. Her eyes were gray. Her hair was a pale gold, and her lips were a tight, disapproving line beneath a large but narrow nose. She seemed young, at least to Xantcha. It seemed as well that she had never smiled or laughed. Who are you? Xantcha asked, though what are you was the question foremost in her mind. The multiverse might well contain an infinite number of worlds, but had no more than 20 of sentient types. If Xantcha followed Urza's example and disregarded those types that, though clearly sentient, were also completely feral without the hope of civilization, or nearly 80 if she followed her own inclination to regard men and women of every type as distinct species. Urza's type was the most common, with the arrogance of the clear majority. He called himself simply a man, where others were elf men or dwarf men or gremlin men. His wife, Kayla bin Krug, had been a woman, a very beautiful woman. When Zancha had asked Urza for a single word that united men and women, as elves united elf men and elf women, he answered mankind, which seemed to her a better way of uniting all the men, common and rare, rather than common men with their wives and daughters. When she demanded a better word, Urza had snarled and walked away. Zancha wondered what he'd make of the woman standing in front of her. Wonder sparked a hope he was still alive and that she'd find him here, but another thought crowded Urza from Zancha's mind. She and the stranger were both dressed in long white gowns. Where had her clothes gone, her sword and knives, the shoulder sack filled with stew and treasures? Except for the gown, Zancha was naked. She wondered if the stern-faced woman was naked, if she was really a woman after all. Her voice was quite deep, and her breasts were a far cry from generous. That was nearly a fifth Phyrexian thought before breakfast, and since the stranger had given no indication that she was going to answer any of her questions, Zancha got to her feet under her and pushed herself upright. Another bout of dizziness left her grateful for the nearby rock. She rested with her back against the stone and took a measure of the world where she'd awakened. It was a golden place of rolling hills and ripened grasses, all caught in the afterglow of a brilliant sunset, with clear air and layers upon layers of clouds overhead. It was difficult, though, to discern where the west lay. Urza had explained it to her in the earliest days. Wherever men dwelt, the sun set in the west and rose in the east. In all quarters of the horizon was marked with dazzling amber peaks that might have been mountains or might have been clouds. It was achingly beautiful and almost as strange. On impulse, Zancha looked for her shadow and found it huddled close by her feet, where she'd expect to find it at high noon. Curiosity became suspicion that got the better of her manners. "Does this world mark time by the sun?" she asked with a scowl, a sixth Phyrexian thought. "Or do you live in immortal sunset?" The stranger drew back and seemed somehow taller. "We think of it as sunrise." "Does the sun ever get risen?" "Our Lady has created all that you can see, each cloud, each breeze, each stone, each tree and blade of grass. She's created them all at their moment of greatest beauty. There is peace here and no need for change." Zancha let out a long, disbelieving breath. "Waste not, want not." "Exactly," the stranger replied, though Zancha had not intended the Phyrexian maxim as a compliment. "Are we alone?" "No." "Where are the others?" "Not here." Zancha's dizziness had passed. If there were others elsewhere, she was ready to look for them. She took a deep breath, opened her mouth, and yawned. "Not here," the woman repeated, an emphatic command this time. "Listen and obey," the vat priests had told Zancha in the beginning, and despite the passage of time, she still found it difficult to disobey, especially when the cyst felt heavy in her gut, heavy and oddly unreliable. She swallowed the lump that was part unemerged sphere and part rising panic. "How did I get here?" "I don't know." "How long have I been here?" "Since you arrived." "Where am I?" "Where you are." Panic surged again, and this time Zancha couldn't fight it down. "What manner of world is this?" she shouted. "The sun doesn't rise or set. You give me answers that aren't answers. Is this Phyrexia? Is that it? Have I been brought back to Phyrexia?" The stranger blinked, but said nothing. "Can I leave? Is Urza here? Can I find Urza?" More silence. Zancha wanted to run. She was lucky she could walk. Her legs had become the legs of a lethargic stranger. Every step required concentration, calculation, and blind faith as she transferred weight from one foot to the other. After 10 strides, Zancha was panting and needed to rest. She didn't dare sit down for fear she wouldn't have the strength to stand again, so she bent from the hips and kept her balance by bracing clammy, shaky hands on the gown-covered knees. The stranger wasn't following her. Zancha pulled herself erect and started walking again. She took nearly 20 cautious steps before her strength gave out. The stranger hadn't moved at all. "Urza!" Zancha thought his name with the same precision she used with her mnemonics when she yawned. Urza had never admitted that he was open to her thoughts, but he never denied it either. "Urza, I'm in a strange place. Nothing is all wrong, but it's not right. Either, and I'm not myself. If you're nearby..." She stopped short of begging or pleading. If he had survived their last battle, and Zancha was unwilling to believe that she'd outlived Urza the Artificer, and she certainly couldn't have gotten here on her own. If Urza weren't busy with problems of his own, then he would come. Until then, she would walk. The heaviness and lethargy didn't go away as the dizziness had, but Xantcha became accustomed to them, as she would have become accustomed to herself to the rise and the fall of a boat's deck. Xantcha might not know where she was or where she was going, but when she looked over her shoulder, she'd left a clean line through the ripe grass. The stranger had told at least one truth. The air was enough. Xantcha forgot her hunger and never became thirsty, even though she worked up a considerable sweat forcing herself across the hills. Up and down and up again. Eventually, Xantcha lost sight of the stranger and the rock where she'd awakened. There were other rocks along her chosen path, all dun-colored and eroded into curves that were the same, yet also unique. Once, and only once, Xantcha saw a bush and veered off her straight path to examine it. The bush was shoulder-high and sprawling. Its leaves were tiny but intensely green, the first green she'd found on this sunset-colored world. Pale berries clustered on inner branches. Xantcha considered picking a handful, then noticed the thorns, too. A lot of them, and each as long as her thumb. The stranger had been appalled when she mentioned hunting for her food, as if nothing here needed anything more than air to survive. But if that were true, then why the thorns, and why were there berries only on the inner branches? The stranger had spoken of a lady, of a creation and perfection. Someone, somewhere, was telling lies. Xantcha left the berries alone. She rejoined her trail through the grass. If there were predators, they'd have no trouble finding her. The golden grass was ripe and brittle. She left a wake of broken stalks and wished she still had her sword or at least a knife. Aside from the stranger, Xantcha had seen nothing living that wasn't also rooted into the ground. No birds or animals, not even insects. A place that had berries should have insects. Even Phyrexia had insects. Xantcha walked until her body told her it was time to sleep. How long she'd walked or how far were unanswerable questions. She made herself a grass mattress beside another rock, because habit said a rock provided more shelter than open grass. If the stranger could be believed, night never fell, the air wouldn't turn cold, there was no reason not to sleep soundly. But Xantcha didn't trust the stranger. She couldn't keep her eyes closed long enough for the grass beneath her to make impressions in her skin, and after a handful of failed naps, she started walking again. If walking and fitful napping were a day, then Xantcha walked for 3 days before she came upon a familiar stranger waiting beside a weathered rock. Even remembering that she, herself, had been one of several thousand identical newts, Xantcha was sure it was the same stranger. The rock was the same, and a wake of broken grass began nearby. The stranger had moved. She was sitting rather than standing, and she was aware that Xantcha had returned, following her closely with her gray eyes. But she didn't speak. Silence reigned until Xantcha couldn't bear it. "You said there were others. Where? How can I find them?" "You can't." "Why not? How big is this world? What happened to me? Did I trick myself into walking in a circle? Answer me. Answer my questions. Is this some sort of punishment?" "Manners be damned." Xantcha threatened the seated woman with her fists. "Is this Phyrexia? Are you some new kind of priest?" The woman's expression froze between shock and disdain. She blinked, but her gray eyes didn't become flashing jewels as Urza's would have done, nor did she raise any other defense. Yet Xantcha backed away, lowered her arms, and unclenched her hands. "So, you can control yourself. Can you learn? Can you sit and wait?" Xantcha had learned harder lessons than sitting opposite of enigmatic strangers, though few that seemed more useless. Other than the slowly shifting cloud layers, the occasionally rippling grass, and the gray-eyed woman, there was nothing to look at, nothing to occupy Xantcha's thoughts, and if the goal were self-reflection... "Urza says I have no imagination," Xantcha explained when her legs had begun to twitch so badly she had to get up and walk around the rock a few times. "My mind is empty. I can't see myself without a mirror. It's because I'm Phyrexian." "Lies," the stranger said without looking up. "Lies?" Xantcha retorted, ready for an argument, ready for anything that would cut the boredom. "You're a fine one to complain about lies." But the stranger didn't take Xantcha's bait, and Xantcha returned to her chosen place. Days were longer beside the rock. Sitting was less strenuous than walking, and despite her suspicions, Xantcha slept soundly with the stranger nearby. They had a conversational breakthrough on the 4th day of unrelenting boredom when a line of black dots appeared beneath the lowest cloud layer. "The others?" Xantcha asked. She would have soared off into the sphere days earlier and over her companion's objections if the cyst weren't still churning and awkward in her gut. The stranger stood up, a first since Xantcha had returned from her walk. Gray eyes wrapped on the moving specks. She walked into the unbroken grass. She reached out toward them with both arms stretched to the fingertips, but the specks moved on. Her arms fell, and she returned to Xantcha, all sagging shoulders and weariness. In this world without night, it finally dawned on Xantcha that she might have leapt to the wrong conclusions. "How long have you been here?" A friend's concern, rather than a prisoner's accusation. "I came with you." Still a circular answer, but the tone had been less aloof. Xantcha persisted. "How long ago was that? How much time has passed since we've both been here?" Time cannot be cut and measured." "As long as we've been sitting here, was I lying under the rock longer than that, or not as long?" The stranger's brow furrowed. She looked at her hands. "Longer. Yes, much longer." "Longer than you expected?" "Very much longer." "The air sustains us, but otherwise we've been forgotten." More furrowed brows, more silence, but the language implanted in her mind had words for time and forgetting. Meaning came before words. The stranger had to understand the question. "Why are we both here beside this rock and forgotten? What happened?" "The angels found you, and another."
"Urza?"
"I was with Urza."
"With another not like you. His eyes see everything."
Xantcha slouched back against the rock. Raw fear drained down her spine. Urza. She'd been found with Urza. Everything would be resolved. It was only a matter of time. What happened to Urza?
"The angels brought you both to the lady's palace. The lady held on to Urza. But you are not like Urza. She said he could do nothing with you, and you would die. The lady does not look upon death."
"I was struck out here to die, and you were put here to watch me until I did. But I didn't, and so we're both stuck here. Is that it?"
"We will wait."
"For what?"
"The palace."
Xantcha pressed her hands over her mouth lest her temper escape. A newt, she told herself. The gray-eyed stranger was a newt. She listened, she obeyed, she had no imagination, and didn't know how to leap from one thought to another. Xantcha herself had been like that until Gix had come to the first sphere, probing her mind, making her defend herself, changing her forever. Xantcha had no intention of invading the stranger's privacy. She didn't have the ability, even if she had the intention. All she wanted was the answers that would reunite her with Urza. And if her questions changed the stranger, did that make Xantcha herself another Gix? No, she decided, and lowered her hands. She would not have poured acid down the fumarole to Gix's grave if he'd done nothing more than awaken her self-awareness. "What if we didn't wait?" Xantcha asked with all the enthusiasm of a conspirator in pursuit of a partner. "What if we went to the palace ourselves?"
"We can't."
"Why not? Urza gave me a gift once. If you could tell me where the palace is, it could take us both there."
"No. Impossible. We shouldn't be speaking of this. I shouldn't be speaking with you at all. The lady herself could do nothing with you. Enough. We will wait, in perfect silence."
The stranger bowed her head and folded her hands in her lap. Her lips moved rapidly as she recited something, Xantcha guessed a prayer, to herself. No matter. The wall had been breached. Xantcha was a conspirator in search of a partner, and she had nothing else to do but plan her next attack. Within 2 days, she had the stranger's name, Sosinna, and the certainty that Sosinna considered herself a woman. 2 days more, and she had the name of the lady, Sarah. After that, it was quite easy to keep Sosinna talking, although the sad truth was that Sosinna knew no more about Sarah's world than Xantcha had known about Phyrexia when Urza first rescued her. Sosinna was a sister of Sarah, one of many women who served that lady in her palace. If Xantcha had not walked for 3 days straight and found herself back where she started, she would have laughed aloud when Sosinna described Sarah's palace as a wondrous island floating forever among the golden clouds. But it did seem true that Sarah's world had no land, not as other worlds where men and women dwelt had great masses of rocks rising from their oceans. Xantcha had already learned that she couldn't walk to the edge of the floating island where she and Sosinna sat in exile, but once she had thought of a floating island in her mind, Xantcha could see that many of the darker clouds around them weren't clouds at all, but miniature worlds of grass and stone. The others Sosinna had mentioned were angels, winged folks who did Sarah's bidding away from the palace. Angels had found Urza and Xantcha, though Sosinna didn't know where, and Angels had brought Zancha and Sosina to their exile island because the sisters of Sarah were unable to leave the floating palace on their own. The Angel's wings weren't like Urza's cyst. The idea of having an artifact reside permanently in her stomach appalled Sosina so much that she stopped talking for 3 full days. Nor were the wings added in some floating island equivalent of the Fane of Flesh. That notion roused Sosina's anger.
Angels, she informed Zancha emphatically, are born. Here we are all born. The lady reveres life. She would not ever countenance that Fane, filth, waste, death. No wonder that lady said you could not be helped. I will have nothing more to do with you, nothing at all.
Sosina couldn't keep her vow. The woman who'd sat silently for days on end could not resist telling Zancha in great detail about the perfect way in which the lady raised her realm's children. Births, it seemed, were rare. Incipient parents dwelt in the palace under the lady's immediate care, and their precious children, once they were born and weaned, went to the nursery where the lady personally undertook their education. Sosina's voice thickened with nostalgia as she described the tranquil cloister where she'd learned the arts of meditation and service. Privately, Zancha thought Lady Sarah's nursery sounded as grim as the Fane of Flesh, but she kept those thoughts to herself, smiling politely, even wistfully, at the new revelation. On the 20th day of forced smiles, Zancha's conspiratorial campaign achieved its greatest victory when Sosina confessed that she was in love, perfectly and eternally, with one of her nursery peers, an angel. "Is that permitted?" Zancha interrupted before she had the wit to censor herself. The notion of love fascinated her, and spending most of her life in Urza's shadow or hiding her unformed flesh beneath a young man's clothes, she had very little opportunity to learn love's secrets. "You don't have wings." Zancha's curiosity was ill-timed and rude. It jeopardized everything she'd gained through long days of patient questions, but it was sincere. On worlds where mankind lived side by side with elves or dwarves or any other sentience, love, with all its complications, was rarely encouraged, more frequently forbidden. She hardly expected love between the sisters of Sarah and winged angels to flourish in a place where the mere appearance of the sun would have spoilt the perfection of the sunrise. But Sosina surprised Zancha with a furious blush that stretched from the collar of her white gown into her pale golden hair.
"Wings," Sosina exclaimed, "have nothing to do with it."
A lie, if ever Zancha had heard one.
"We are all born the same, raised the same. Our parentage is not important to Lady Sarah. We are all equal in her service. She encourages us to cherish each other openly and to follow our hearts, not our eyes, when we declare our one true love."
More lies, though Sosina's passion was real.
"Kenadern is a paragon,"
she confided in a whisper.
"No one serves the lady with more bravery and vigor. He has examined every aspect of his being and cast out all trace of imperfection. There is not one mote of him that isn't pure and devoted to duty. He stands above all with the other angels, and no one would fault him if he were proud, but he isn't. Kenadern has embraced humility. There isn't a woman alive who wouldn't exchange tokens with him, but he has given his to me."
Sosina removed her veil and, sweeping her hair aside, revealed a tiny golden earring in the lobe of her left ear. "Beautiful, an honor above all others," Zancha agreed, trying to imitate Sosina's lofty tone while she racked her mind for a way to turn this latest revelation toward a reunion with Urza and escape from Sarah's too perfect realm. "It must be difficult for you to be apart from him. You can't know what he's doing or where. If something had happened to him, you wouldn't know. And, well, if he's given you his token, it's not likely that he'd have forgotten you. So you have to think that he's looking for you if he can." Zancha smiled, a very Phyrexian smile. Urza would disapprove, although there was no reason for him to ever know. "Of course, sometimes even paragons get distracted." Several long moments of nervous fiddling passed before Sosina said,
"We have our duties. We both serve the lady. Everyone serves the lady first and foremost."
She sat up straight and looked very uncomfortable.
"I have strayed from the path. We will speak of these things no more."
But the damage had been done. Sosina had lost the ability to stare endlessly at nothing. She watched the clouds. Zancha supposed Sosina was looking for angels and hoped, for her own selfish reasons, that they appeared. In the end, though, it wasn't angels that got them moving. Once she'd learned that Sarah's realm was composed of islands drifting in a cloudy sea, Zancha had quickly realized that each island had its own rhythm and path. With a persistent ache in her stomach, Zancha wasn't tempted to yawn out the sphere and become her own island, but she thought she could hop from one island to another if a more interesting one drifted near. She dismissed the possibility of a collision between two of the ladies' islands as an unimaginable imperfection until the ground bucked beneath them. One moment, Zancha and Sasana were lying flat, clinging to the rooted grass. The next, they were both thrown into the air while the land beneath shattered. For an instant, they floated weightless. Then, the falling began. Without thinking or hesitating, Zancha yawned and grabbed Sasana's ankle. The cyst was slow to release its power, and the sphere, when it finally emerged, was midnight black.